All right, what's up? Let's make sure this is working. Oh my god, a commercial? How dare? All right, let's see.
Bro, the level just started. We're
Oh
already
my
getting
god,
butt.
bro, the level just started.
These guys out and build this crossbow tower as fast as possible.
Are we working? Ah, perfect. A little bit of a snafu before. Okay, shut up, me. All right, we are here. Luckily, there's not technical difficulties this time. And I need to learn how to. The camera is so much better on my phone. I've tried to look it up. It seems like you have to do a lot of goofy nonsense or just technical work to actually get it to where the phone is doing the live stream, and then I can moderate it on the computer. But well, doesn't matter. So I guess we'll taking any questions, suggestions for topics, all that sort of good stuff. I can suppose what I can talk about at the moment is I just got back. I just did a talk at a treatment center I'd been to before. I actually hadn't been to it for a while, but I'm part of like a program where people keep in touch with, it's like an alumni program. Woo, alumni of a treatment center. Congratulations, you used to be an alcoholic or a crankhead, and now you're hopefully not. But I remember looking at people, and I guess one of the things we'll start off with is that treatment. I don't know if anybody watching this has been to treatment, was considering treatment. Maybe it had been multiple times, but treatment. I always, and this is what I started talking about with was the fact that rehab, just as a thing in society, as like an experience, is very very strange. It's such a weird sort of experience to have because I can't even really think of like an analog for it for what life other thing in life that is like it, because it's just one of the very rare things is that it's people of all backgrounds. Now, some people might have ideas in their mind about what an alcoholic or an addict or someone in rehab looks like, but the truth is, for the most part, you don't know anybody. Anybody could be walking through that door. Um, it's addiction is all inclusive in a sense, and it doesn't care about your background or the money you have or your lineage. I mean, sometimes it does in a bad way. And it seems like almost nearly this hereditary sort of thing, which I always thought was, people look to, they wonder if it's genetic or wonder if it's not genetic, um, or how much of it is. And like I'd say, don't forget about the nurture part either, because truthfully, I think what people forget too is that it's not just genes, but if you were to grow up in an alcoholic or addiction household, um, just the stress that is in there growing up, because you grow up in any dysfunctional household, and there's a good chance you can adopt maladaptive behaviors. And the thing is, like, I knew people in my life that had addiction, and there's always this sense, again, if you use like the logical brain, there's always this sense that you see something that is just, if it's not glorified or anything, you see something that is destroying someone's life. It looks miserable. Everyone's mad at them. You're mad at them. They look like they're in constant pain and suffering. And it's just, if you see that, especially as a child who, just soaks in everything around them like a sponge, you see that and you would think, oh, why would anyone do that? Has I not? I've been shown an example, right? I've been shown what not to do because of how miserable it looks, and how much chaos that just even being around it has caused my life, right? But again, like I always say with addiction, is that you run into some problems when you try to use logical brain, when you try to use reason, because so much of the functions of addiction don't work with reason. It's quite unreasonable and it's quite illogical in a lot of respects. And so, and one thing I always think too, just even in a bigger sense, is that you don't choose what you learn from people in some respects. Like you're not always privy to like picking and choosing to gaining wisdom from experiences that you have with others. You could see just what should be a bad example, but then you might emulate that. And who knows why? Who knows why one thing clearly comes across as like a warning and something like, I'll take note. That looks like that sucks. Not going to do that. And then something where literally almost just through this way of like osmosis, you mimic it in a certain way. And I've seen that so much. I mean, that seems to be more the norm than someone who grows up in a household of addiction and doesn't go that route, And when people don't, they'll say like, yeah, I didn't drink or I never did drugs because I saw what it did to my family. I saw what it did to my father or to my mother or to my siblings or to all my friends around me or something. So I never did it. A bunch of people are like, yeah, that makes sense. Why doesn't everybody do that? But I mean, that's just not the way it works. And like I said, you could extrapolate that to a whole bunch of other stuff, like just in life. Like, a lot of people in that sense, like they may grow up and they hate their father. And then you hear a lot, like, I grew up to be like him. How did this happen? I despised him and I didn't want to be that. But like I said, you just don't dictate exactly what you'll follow in some respects. Your brain is forming, and who knows what little cues that you're picking up on, and who knows what appears attractive to you. Like I think one of the really difficult things in life is that you don't always really get to choose what you want. Like the things that you actually desire, right? Because if I could choose that, I would just want to be enthralled with altruistic things and being a good person. I would saving money, and I would want to want all those things. I'd want to always do exercise, and I'd want lettuce and celery and plain, chicken breast and steamed vegetables. But you don't always get to choose that. So before I get all philosophical with that, I just think about when people, they grow up, and having worked in case management, and whether it was a child welfare system, whether it was in the mental health field, and then still working a little bit adjacently to it, you see this all the time where people just repeat the same mistakes that they grew up with. And it's kind of just in this sense of like, that's all you really know. And you talk about like how some people emulate others because it may be bad behaviors, it may be selfish or destructive, but they think it's cool at the time. And there's some things where you're like, this doesn't seem cool, it doesn't seem fun. Why would you follow in that way? And there's always something I say too, where again, when you work in that sort of like logical thinking of why you would be a certain way with drugs or alcohol, like one of the biggest things, especially people in treatment, and this is one thing I said, was that you probably imagine that sort of scenario where you wish you could go back and you wish you could tell yourself, your past self, some things, or just reveal the truth to them. Just let them know, shake your younger self and just be like, I'm you, you're me. Like, this doesn't end up well. Don't do this thing. Don't do that. Please. I'm telling you, I'm the ghost of the future or whatever. And, honestly, I've always said that, man, if I were able to do that, I don't know. I think the only thing I'd tell my past self is like, who won the Super Bowls, lotto numbers. I mean, I'd be a terrible future role model or messenger, because I'd just be like, all right, don't do drugs and alcohol, but gamble. No, but I say that because I always think to myself, like, I know how things are now that I'm older, but who also knew that drugs and alcohol were bad? Younger me. Like at a young age, I knew, just because of the way I responded to it. Like I said, I went to treatment at a very young age. And I knew this. I mean, I lived in a little bit of denial or delusion for some bit about how it was going to affect me, whether I was addicted or an alcoholic or not. But for the most part, even before it got too out of hand, I kind of knew. And I think this is a funny thing, is that if I went back and was able to talk to young, naive Dave, I would probably think to myself, younger me, I would probably think like, okay, it's good. I'll take note of that. So now thank you for, giving me this knowledge, this valuable knowledge. So what I'm going to do, because of what you've taught me, this wisdom, I'm going to use drugs and alcohol responsibly. Because I'm saying there was no way I was not going to do that. There was no way I wasn't because of all the things they did for me in a sense. And that is one thing too where what I think about a lot is that it for me, I think it is important not to promote and not to glorify, but it is important to acknowledge and to respect the things that drugs and alcohol did for you in this sense. Because, I remember, speaking of treatment, you'd have some exercises where you talk about like your values and stuff. And, they'd ask questions of like, what's a waste of time for you? And people would write down drinking and doing drugs. Or, maybe unprompted, they would say that. It's like, oh, it's such a waste of time, so pointless. Absolutely just it means nothing. It's just a huge waste of time. And I like, I what I will do is like I will always think about it this way, where to me, it's like what would truly be a waste of time for me would be like tap dancing. Like I'm not even good at regular dancing, and I don't know what venues I would do tap dancing at. I don't really like it. I don't care to do it. And so I truly learning to tap dance would be a waste of time for me, right? So you're not going to see me at the tap dance studio at 5:55 in the morning, waiting for it to be 6 o'clock so it can open and so I can spend money on tap dance lessons that I don't have. You're not going to see me like feeling like garbage every day and puking when I brush my teeth because of tap dancing. I'm going to keep tap dancing or marching through the snow, or everybody in my life is pissed off at me. They're like, David, quit. For the love of God, please quit tap dancing. Quit trying to learn. Stop it. I'm not going to do it because I don't care about it. However, I did all those things with drugs and alcohol because it did do something for me. Even if it was totally like a factor of diminishing returns. You get less, even though the more you do, you get less over time. And I know some people could think, well, it's like, well, but here's the deal. You were stuck in the cycle of addiction. It hijacked your mind. It was changing the way you're thinking, which is all very true. But once you step out of it, then you'll realize what a big, huge waste of time and how pointless and dumb it was to do, right? But I'll tell you something. In getting sober and being sober for a little while, and as you navigate life and if you go through the trials and tribulations and you go through all the ups and downs and just day-to-day life, even the tedium and monotony of it can be sometimes, is that you learn why you did drugs and alcohol because you'll get urges to do it. And if you investigate where those urges come from, which I try to do, I try to gain as much insight as the way this fucking crazy thing works. I realize why you do it. You realize in the sense, I think one of the funniest, one of the funniest examples of addiction in this really weird roundabout sense is that there's the movie Walk Hard with Dewey Cox. I don't even think I've seen the full thing, but I've seen these parts where there's a running joke. Or if you haven't seen the movie, it's just this comedy where this guy becomes like this rock superstar, like Johnny Cash type dude. And it shows, it's like a biopic, one of those biography movies, like Rocket Man or the Walk the Line, the Johnny Cash one. It goes through those scenes where drugs are coming onto the scene and there's the groupies and the after parties and all that type of stuff. And then there's this guy who tries to warn the main guy, Dewey, played by Tim Meadows, which I love Tim Meadows. But there's this guy who's always like warning him not to do drugs. But the joke is that he just, in doing so, he just keeps talking about how awesome they are. Like in this stupid sense where, you just be like, you don't want to do this, man. He'll be doing drugs and he'll look back and be like, you don't want to do this, Dewey. You don't want to do it, okay? Because drugs, they turn all your bad feelings into good ones. So don't do it. And I laugh deeply at that, like from a deep place, because that really was a part of why I did that. In the beginning, that's what it does. Like I said, the craziest thing is that people, when they'll get sober and they may feel shame or they may be upset by the fact that they have cravings and urges. And especially, I was talking to people that were in rehab at the moment, and it's just like, well, of course you're going to feel cravings and urges to do it. Why else would you be in rehab if not for that? It's weird if you never felt it, which I hear some people do. They go into their sobriety and then the urge was lifted, but that's not normally the case. And there's nothing. I understand the kind of psychology of why that would be shameful, because it's this thing that you don't want to do, that no one around you wants you to do. It's a thing that leads you to hurting people, and it just upsets everyone, and it's self-destructive. So it's so stupid for wanting to do it. How can it be so dumb? Why do I want to do it? But going back to one of my original points, you don't always control what you want to do. And here's the thing too, is that and this was a mistake I made because sometimes it was because of shame. Sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of like, I don't know, out of like a mental or emotional laziness where I wouldn't quite be telling people how I was feeling. Be like, we'll just work on this. We'll work on this in here by myself because I don't want to freak everybody out. I don't want everybody to be mad at me, and I don't want people to worry about me. So I won't tell anybody. But one of the big problems with doing that, besides just being, dishonest, and not letting people help you, one of the problems is that you still, in this sort of way, in a different way, but also similar, you're acting the way you did in your addiction. You're keeping things to yourself. You're sort of hiding how you feel, and you're hiding especially what's going on up in here. So in this way, you're acting as you were when you were drinking and using. And let me tell you something. One of the things that would be a huge, if you want to talk about like a relapse trigger or anything like that, one of the biggest ones for me was not just the drugs and alcohol thoughts or anything like that, or the imagery, or things like that, like things directly related to drugs and alcohol. One of the biggest triggers for me is doing behaviors that I did in my addiction, even if they didn't involve drugs and alcohol. And one of those ones I talk about the most, and it's usually this type of behavior that it leads to every relapse, because what a lot of people tell you is that maybe if it's like your first couple of days sober or first couple of weeks, maybe you can just relapse one day because you were caught off guard, you're just too vulnerable, too fragile. That could possibly happen. But if you have a considerable amount of time sobriety, even a couple months, a relapse really doesn't just happen in one day. There's usually it's something starts. It's kind of like a just the dominoes. Like something starts and it goes into it. And I know a lot of people talk about it, the fact that it was just weird. I was in the grocery store and then I just came out with the bottle and I didn't even realize it. And I've felt that before too. But honestly, things start before, and it's usually not drug and alcohol related behaviors. I mean, sometimes it's people that are just exposed to it too much. They're still around people that are drinking when they're alcoholic, or they're still around people that are using drugs, or they know they have drugs and all that type of stuff. And it just slowly whittles away in you, or just plants a seed in your mind that you might not even be aware is there until it's too late. But one of the things for me was what would begin a relapse. I say that just about all my relapses, besides the one that just like you can barely call them relapses, I was just kind of continuing what I was doing. But one of the ones that would start every relapse when I had some time under my belt was a lie. It all started with a lie, because it was one of the, that was one of my biggest like addiction behaviors. It was one of my, and the thing is that I always say that one of the biggest, if I'm being honest with myself, one of the biggest reasons why I drank and used was because I wanted to avoid discomfort. It was in any sort of way, whether it was mental, emotional, physical discomfort. I just wanted to avoid it, which is always hilarious because in doing so, I was just actually inviting shitloads of more discomfort than I would have had. But it was discomfort on my own terms, whatever. But it was to avoid discomfort. And here's the thing, that is, at least for me, that's a big reason of why I lie. Lying is not me getting high or getting drunk or blocking, emotions, but it is avoiding discomfort, because usually I don't just lie just to lie. I'm not just like this sort of random liar. In a way you can say, I guess, pathological liar. I guess I always wondered what exactly that definition was, because there's a pathology to it. So there is, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But I would lie because a lot of the reason people lie is that it's sometimes very convenient, and it helps you temporarily in a lot of ways, where even like the little white lies, it avoids confrontation. You avoid conflict. You can avoid responsibilities. You can just avoid doing stuff you don't want to do. You just, or having awkward conversations where you just lie. Someone invites you to something, you just lie and say, I have something else that I'm doing. You don't, but you maybe not want to go. But instead of just telling a person that, you don't want to hurt their feelings, and you just don't want it to be weird, so you lie. And so you also can lie to avoid responsibility, or you can lie, like I said, sometimes I would lie again, this was when I'd be sober. I would lie, especially in my relationship, because I'm just like, oh, I don't want to have this fight. If I say the truth about whatever this thing that was asked about me, it's going to start this fight that we always have, or, and instead of actually working on it and having the fight begin, but then really trying to talk through it instead of just like, just letting it roll. I just avoid it. It's just boo, magic trick, lies, problem over for now. Or especially, I think that's what people consider about those white lies is that it doesn't prolong anything. It just kind of like ends it right then and there. And what's the thing that people always say, like that old timey thing, like the only time it's okay to lie is if your wife asks, do these jeans make my butt look big? Or, that's super stereotype one. But even if you break that one down, right? That is to avoid a conflict. That is to avoid dealing with a situation you don't want to deal with. And so in this way, people don't really think about it as much, but I would say for myself is that lying is a coping mechanism. It's a maladaptive one, but it is a way to cope, especially if it's like lying to yourself in a sort of way where you lie and you say that I'm fine or that things, or if you're even lying in a delusional way where you're avoiding something you need to work on, but you're like, it'll just work out. And, that's how you deal with it instead of just dealing with the anxiety and the pressure of realizing you need to take care of something, but then you also don't want to. What is your roundabout way through that? And it's through lying. And so going back to the idea of recovery and of relapse in a sense is that lying is huge in this sense because it does another thing that is huge, especially in early recovery or just any recovery, is that lying can be so negative. Oh, we got first person. Hey, David. Hey, shit. I'm sorry. How do you say Aristian? No, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Don't worry. I say plenty of names very incorrectly because I'm bad at that. But hello. Like I said, any topics, any questions, you can just derail what I'm saying right now if you have something pressing or something. And again, thank you for all your help. You were awesome. Thank you, Greg. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Sometimes I'll just think, man, I'm just a weirdo just talking to myself in a room, but I do appreciate that. When I say questions too, by the way, I'm not saying I'm some arbiter of wisdom of anything like that. What I mean so more is just like my thoughts on something, or usually a question could just lead to like, this is a thing I've been through because I am, I've just been through so many situations with so much attempts at recovery at a very young age throughout my life, just sometimes being years in the cycle of it, going through all iterations of, I say this too, like I've been in every iteration of like forced or willing recovery where like the law, Johnny Law was, forcing me to go into treatment or AA meetings and I didn't want to. Sometimes it forced me into it, but I still wanted to. Sometimes I was not being forced by the law, but I didn't want to. There was some outside external pressures, family, friends, significant other, work, whatever. And then sometimes no one was making me do nothing. And because I really wanted to get sober. Yes. In addiction or family and relatives should be a part of treatment. Absolutely. And, I talk about treatment sometimes and I assume, I guess I always go off the assumption that a lot of them will be similar. I can't imagine that if you go to a treatment center in Idaho, like there is different ones. There are ones that are 12. There, who cares? But there are ones that if you go to a 12-step one, I would assume that a lot of those will be similar. 12-step one is, of course, like ones that are based on Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, any of the anonymous is, and I assume a lot of those would be similar, like the same curriculum type of stuff. There's other ones like the one I spoke at. That one is not 12-step. It's more cognitive behavioral, dialectical behavioral, DBT, CBT, EBT, ABC, and a lot of those types of stuff. But going back to the family and relatives should be a part of, and I got actually some interesting stories from there, which I won't reveal any names, still keeping confidentiality. But a lot of times treatment centers do offer that. They offer family sessions, as they call it, and they can be like a lot of times a family session. You like in again, just assuming that most treatments work this way, whether it's 12-step or not, that you have a counselor like that you're with, a one-on-one counselor that you're with throughout the, your 28 or 30-day or however many day stay. And that counselor usually, not all treatment centers are created equal in quality or not, but you can do a counseling session with the wife, the husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, the family, mom, dad, children. There's stipulations for a lot of things. Like some, they don't want you hopping into it right away. Sometimes it's like they only want you to do it in your last week. Some, they're fine with doing it every week. You can have one. It just depends. And the counselor works with them and you to where they try to enlighten them if the family is not, they don't know really what's going on. Because that's the one thing is people in treatment also often forget that the people in your life aren't in there with you and they don't have any idea what you're really doing in there. And sometimes people get resentful because they think I'm just having a vacation in there. And then I don't know, maybe they see some like Passages Malibu commercial where they make treatment look like a vacation. And they're like, fuck you, I have to pay the bills and raise the kids. And you're just out there just playing horseshoes and lying on the beach. And like, there's no beach. This is Nebraska. Anyways, but so they invite them in and they have these sessions. And they work through this where they try to be enlightening and they try, to express, they allow the family to also express themselves, try to have a judgment-free zone, try to avoid confrontation. I remember I was studying to be a not just drug and alcohol counselor, but a mental health counselor. And I was thinking about that. I was like, damn, those got to be some pretty intense situations because you could have people that just have years of pent-up rage or disappointment or sadness. And then finally they get their turn to speak. And I remember being in rehab with some people where they'd come out of those, they'd come out of those family sessions and they look like they were just shell shocked, like that they just went through like, I don't want to do that anymore, because people get to say their piece. And what makes it very difficult sometimes though, is that what I was talking about in the beginning of this, about the family as a, or addiction as a family disease or generational disease, is that a lot of people, the people in their life are also alcoholics and addicts. And it gets very tricky about how you were to invite the family, relatives and loved ones, especially a significant other who's still currently using. How do you invite them? Do you allow them to be? What parameters you set? Because it is very difficult to have anything that's fruitful or any substantial sort of session or therapy if somebody is still using or drinking, sometimes even under the influence. I know people that they've had to kick the family members out. They're like, you can't be high, you can't be drunk and be here and be in a therapy session. And it just causes all sorts. So it's really sad. A lot of times there's not family sessions for that very reason, or it can only be with certain people because they just won't. And it's what I said too, even on a personal level, counseling, honestly, if you're in the cycle of addiction, man, it's almost pointless. Counseling is very, very, very useful, very useful. But if you're in the cycle of addiction, it's almost pointless because it's so hard to retain things. And I don't mean retain things in a sense of you forget. You're just so drunk. You're like, whoa, dude, I went to a counseling session yesterday. No, but like to really apply them to your life, because it just, the addiction has to get under wraps, because to me, it just feels like sort of like any growth you have is just goes away once you just start embarking back into the cycle. Like it's just like a mental Etch-a-Sketch where you may have made all this progress in your session you had, and then it's shake, and you're back to where you are because you're committing the same problems over and over again. And what I always say is that, man, at least the counselor's getting paid. If you are in the cycle of addiction, and it can be helpful if you're talking about it. If you are not admitting to your use or drinking, or if you are very, very much minimizing the amount and frequency that you drink or use, like you said, the counselors are getting paid. You're just basically kind of like wasting your time, because, and here's a way that like people get misdiagnosed, because you talk about all these symptoms in your life, but you're not saying what's the cause, or they can't figure out what the cause. So they're just going to attribute it to something else. Like, you know what? I was diagnosed bipolar at one point, and if they didn't know that I was drinking every day, yeah, I'm kind of bipolar when I'm in active alcoholism. Like, so how are they to know? And, I mean, think about it in another sense. if you're just straight up going hard with meth and you've been up for days and you start hearing voices and you have things on your skin and stuff like that, and you are telling them all this, but they don't know, they should be able to tell, but if they don't know you're using meth, they're going to think you're schizophrenic, because why wouldn't they if they don't know about the meth part? Okay, one of the Hi, Gabe. I live in China, but recently visited Germany and the Netherlands. This caused by cannabis addiction to restart. Oh, this caused my cannabis addiction to restart. I spent nearly the entire trip stoned. Glad to be away from it again. Yeah, I mean, I think weed addiction, which some people even are like, unfortunately, some people even roll their eyes at that, but is very insidious in this sense where weed can be relatively harmless to a lot of people, but what it can do to some people, and this is one thing I've seen especially where I've known with a lot of people and some few personal friends where when they struggle with depression and they start using weed habitually, it like sinks them. It's like, ankle weights in quicksand where they just go deeper. A friend I knew went, they had to go to the psych ward, which he had depression problems before, but never anything on that level. But he was isolated in his room and smoking weed just constantly. And I mean, that's one thing we'll do is that, like, as a substance, it can just keep you stuck and it can keep you kind of eroding yourself where if you aren't under the influence, you're not going to stay put in that way. If you're horribly depressed, I mean, don't get me wrong, depression can absolutely immobilize you and keep you stuck. But if you're under the influence, and here's one of the worst things it can do, make you for the time being comfortable in that sort of misery, comfortable in that depression, then you'll stay there for however long. And then one day you'll just be like, how long have I been doing this? How bad have I let this get? Like, I can't remember the last time I went outside. I can't remember if I've talked to anyone besides people at work. If I've just been stuck in this thing, and holy shit, I was so stoned. Not even in a jokey way. I was so stoned I didn't realize how bad things were getting. Like it can exacerbate any sort of mental illness in a really, really bad ways. And one other thing it do is like with all drugs and alcohol, it's a maladaptive coping mechanism. And one of the insidious and almost like if you were to create something just made to destroy people psychologically, if you're just super evil like that, addiction would be like the perfect mechanism for it. Because what it will do is it will get you hooked on one type of coping, so to speak, that instant gratification, escapism, doling of emotions, sort of just with chemicals. It'll not only get you hooked on that, but while you're hooked on that, you don't learn any other coping skills. And if you had any before, they are going to atrophy, because why not just use the one that works right away? The one you prefer, and the one that doesn't require, here's the big thing, doesn't require any effort. That is a big thing. It's not like trying to drag yourself to the gym or drag yourself to counseling or start eating differently and then engaging with people, practicing meditation or going out in nature and doing all this stuff where it sounds like a good idea, but then you wake up and you're like, I don't want to, or you get off work and you're like, I don't want to do any of that shit. It requires effort. Drugs and alcohol, for the most part, don't require you to do anything. You just pop, glug, 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 shoot, smoke, whatever you want to do, and there you go. And, I imagine, I don't know what the username is, numbers and letters, but that's all right. I don't know if people care if I say the username or not, but, visited Germany and the Netherlands. And one of the first things I think of too, as far as like being stoned the whole time, I think about it the same way where there was vacations I went on where I was drunk the whole time. And one of the first things I thought of was just like, man, what a waste. What a waste. I didn't get to fully experience that. I just did that with my mind dulled. It's what I always thought of, like people that like were into acid or shrooms and, they were just like, oh man, dude, I'm already doing that mocking voice. Sorry. I'll do the hippie voice, dude. But, oh man, dude, it'd be sweet would to be go to Sequoia National Park or to go to the, the observatory or the aquarium or, go to these like fantastical places and be stoned or tripping during it. And to me, that always sounded silly. Maybe it's not that silly, but to me it did, because I was like, well, no, those places are stimulating and cool to be at. Where you should like get high is just maybe just a regular forest, or just at your place and just be watching something cool on your on your phone or on the computer or the TV or meditate, or like the whole novelty of it is that it can take you on this trip without actually having to go on a trip. So why do you need to do all these super cool things if it's like if the trip makes it cool as is, you know? And I don't know. I don't know how many people would agree or disagree with that. But what I do remember, going back to the thing about visiting, places and having these sort of special experiences, and then kind of tarnishing it with being drunk or high, because one thing too is that I don't know, some people do feel more engaged when they do certain drugs, But again, this is, by the way, okay, made a caveat here. This is not talking about any sort of recreational user. This is probably kind of talking about a person addicted to something that is using it as self-medication, or using it now at a point just compulsively or anything like that, where you don't you're not very present because as not a recreational user anyways, like you're using probably a lot more than the average person and a lot more frequency, so you're very numb. And so I would think about it too, where I went on a trip to Missouri, and I went to this beautiful I can't even remember, it was a state park there, but I was drunk and I was like, dude, that was sweet. I remember I saw the ocean another time when I was drunk, see the ocean, the Droshan, dude. And I was just like, man, what a waste. What, I didn't need to be drunk. Like, I might as well, I just sat. I was just getting drunk in the sand than rather getting drunk in my room. Like, just, man, because now, like, I'm like, man, I wish I would have saved that so I could do that now, totally sober, and enjoy it. But nope, just wasted during it. And, that goes on to another topic about the, about a lot of the consequences of drinking and using and being in addiction, like especially some of the more acute consequences, legal trouble, getting in trouble at work, fighting with the family, health problems, stuff like that. But, some people can be reticent to change, because one thing I believe is that sometimes people don't change unless they have to. And one thing is that, like, you could be a much more functional user or drinker, and you may not have those problems. You're like, I don't get in trouble at work. I clock in, clock out, totally fine. Hungover for a lot of it. Don't like that part, but taking care of business. I'm paying the bills, taking care of my kids. Finances are in order. I would, it would be nice to save some money, but you know what? If I wasn't spending it on booze or drugs, I would be spending it on fast food or just a stupid new TV that I don't need to buy or whatever. Don't need to. It's not that big of a deal, right? But one of the big things is if you don't check off any of those boxes for bad stuff that happens to you, there is a huge thing. And this is something that I learned, again, in being sober, and the way what people communicated to me was that one of the things that hurt them the most wasn't me fighting them or yelling at them, or, I always thought I was a better drunk because I was more reclusive or more laid back, or sometimes just happy-go-lucky, maybe repeated myself too much, maybe talked a little too loud at times, but then I would shut up if I got the hint. I handled it better. I handled my self-destruction better than you guys know. But the biggest problem is that I actually really wasn't present. People would be around me and they would just, they knew, most of the time they do. And they're just like, well, he's drunk, and he's not slurring his words. He's not stumbling all over the place, but he's just, not quite all the way there. Or, I mean, Christ, is he, how much of this is he going to remember? And just maybe he will remember anything, but just the idea that I have to be worried about that, to be worried that he might not remember, makes me want to check out. It makes me not want to interact with him, or he's drinking or he's high, so his inhibitions are lowered. And so there's always that phrase that a drunk man's words is a sober man's thoughts, or something like that. Kind of this, I think, a misguided and false idea that, drunk people speak the truth. Drunk people have less inhibitions, so they're more likely to say what's on their mind. But let me tell you something. Everything that's on my mind is not the truth, or even what I truly believe. And especially if I'm extremely impulsive in saying it, I could easily be saying a lot of shit that I don't believe or don't actually feel. But with that being said, when you're interacting with people and you're constantly under the influence, people, and if they know, they kind of take a lot of what you even say to them with a grain of salt. And I remember some of the most heartbreaking times was that when I was sober, I'd be having these deep conversations with people, and they would be drunk, and I'd just be like, man, this is a really, they reveal some big secret about them, or something that was really important to them. And maybe, again, that honest words, from a drunk person, maybe it's something they wouldn't have told me. However, soberly, there was a reason they weren't telling me. Like, they weren't ready. And then, they get drunk and they tell you in this really weird way, and maybe they're fibbing parts of it or not doing it correctly. And then, if to me, it makes it even worse, because then they reveal that, and it's kind of like ruined a lot of it. They're like, I didn't, you know what? I actually did not want you to know that for my own personal reasons, or I wanted to tell you it differently. And now I've kind of done it in this messy way. And now I don't even know how much how much significance you take it with, because you were drunk. Like, one of the things I remember in a relationship, what I regretted the most was the first time I said I love you to a girl. I was drunk, and she may not have knew, but I got, when I reflect back on it, I was like, how many of these big moments were me when I was drunk? Now, the truth is, any of them could have happened the way they played out if I was sober, or at least very similar, but it ruined it. What it reminds me of is, like, if you talk to somebody when you're high or drunk and you're unveiling something big, or you're telling something them really important, which also there's a lot of times drunk people are like, gee, I gotta tell you, this is super important, and I'm only telling you because I love you, man. And you're like, I just met you. But the truth is I think about when people reveal, or they tell people very serious and important things when they're drunk. It's like if you have a very funny story, okay, and you're telling a group of your friends this super funny story none of them heard yet. It's got this hilarious thing that happened that works as like a punchline, and you build up, and maybe you're a good storyteller and you're building up to it, and people are like, well, what's going on? This is weird. And you're waiting to tell them that one part. You're like, dude, no way. And they get a huge laugh, and it's surprising everything. And as you're about to say it, someone who was there during when it happened, or they heard you told the story before, they just blurted out. They blurted out without any of the timing. They blurted it out with incorrectly a little bit, or it was a little bit off, or they didn't describe it the right way, but they kind of just go, yeah, dude, when you did that, and they just say it. And then everyone's like, oh, okay, yeah, that was kind of weird. And they're like, they may have noticed the person kind of maybe interrupted you. They're like, anyways, go on. And you're like, now I don't want to say anything. Like, I don't want to tell the story again. I mean, it's already been, the cat's out of the bag. It's already, like, that kind of ruined it now. And that's how I feel about a lot of things that I heard or that I told people when I was under the influence, where it's like, this thing was important to me, or this thing mattered, and it mattered maybe within our relationship, but I kind of just ruined it. Like, and now it might be even more difficult to talk about in any serious or substantial way, because I've told you, and I don't even know how you feel about it. Shit, what if you can't even remember how much you told them? That's always awful. I've been there before where I was like, oh my God, I know I told them about that thing. How much did I tell them about that thing? How much did I, and it's just like, you've disclosed something that was important to you, but you kind of just ruined it. And so back to one of my other points, concerning, the idea of not being present, and to get very personal and serious, there was a major hardship that happened in my in a relationship. I was in a long-term relationship, and to this day, I feel remorse, because it wasn't anything I did, or it wasn't anything I said. I wasn't mean or cruel or anything like that. In a way, I was, though, and I'll get to that in a second, where I just wasn't present. And in not being present, I know my normal mind, because it happens when I am sober, would have picked up on things. Like, a lot of times, and we go back to, families, in social groups, people that are close to you, loved ones in your life, how it can go so awry, is because in your sober, and you don't have to be some psychological wizard or anything like that, but with sobriety and clean, you have clarity. And so you can pick up on things. In the same way, like, if you imagine a drunk person who's at like a family event, and they're being way too crass, they're cussing too much, telling a vulgar story, you're like, dude, not in front of grandma, like, or they're just being very loud, and you can tell, like, maybe you just had a friends get together. There's a friend who got a little bit too drunk too quickly, like this guy, and they're annoying people, or they're They're again, maybe not even something that wrong, but they're just being a little too loud or a little bit too forward with stuff, just a little too whatever, and you can tell that they're not picking up on it. They're not able at all to read the room. They're not picking up on any cues, and everybody's around them trying to be polite or trying not to be a dick to them or anything like that. So they're not really outwardly saying, "Dude, you're being too fucking loud," or "Dude, don't talk about that," or "Dude, just be careful, just slow down." No one's maybe saying that, but they're giving all the hints that if you were sober, you would just be like, "Ooh, maybe need to, yep, I'll slow it down here." But you don't notice that because you're under the influence. Now, that's just kind of an embarrassing, social faux pas sort of way. But in my life, in a much bigger way, there was something that was going on in this person I love very much in her life that one of the cruel things to me when I curse myself is that I usually I pride myself on being a empathetic and I'm usually good on picking up on things like that, and I just wasn't because I was under the influence, and so there was this sort of internal struggle, and this is not being me egotistical, like I could have saved her from this or anything like that, but I could have been there. Um, but I didn't, and as much as I'd want to say like fiend some sort of sense of control that I thought I had, be like, maybe I ignored it. I ignored it because I didn't know it. No, no, no. I straight up did not. I was not picking up on what was happening, how she was feeling, what her responses to some things were. I just wasn't because I wasn't really there. And I remember when we talked later on. Many of these talks I have with people when I'm sober, um, these kind of deep discussions, and we talked about it. And she just told me like how hurtful that was because she was just like, how are you not getting it? I guess I wasn't just outwardly telling you it, but I almost didn't even want to because again, I knew you were still drinking, and I didn't really have much faith in you to be helpful or to be comforting in any sincere or deep way. You can make me laugh, you can be friendly, and you can be loving and affectionate and all that type of stuff, but in a way that I really needed you to be, where I needed you to be on top of your game and I needed you to be at your full capacity, you weren't. I could not count on you. That's another big thing about the gift of sobriety. And as weird as it may sound to like the average person, I was almost going to say normal, but the average person is that, it's so nice just to be responsible and accountable. People are like, whoop-de-doo. But that truly is a gift because let me tell you something. The average person, they're not always responsible or accountable. But when you understand that is now a gift to be that way, when and you have faith in yourself that you're going to say what you're going to do and you're going to do as you say, and you will be there. And if you're not going to make it, if you're not going to be able to do something, you will absolutely verbalize that. You'll make sure it is known. And if you don't want to do something, if you're maybe perhaps setting a boundary, you're advocating for yourself, and you have reasons, and you're in full like sort of knowledge at least of what you're doing, and you can be counted upon. If you want to be, and that's another gift of sobriety is choice and choice of what you do. You can't control the world and you can't choose things for other people in that sense, but you have choice about how you can respond to things. And so there's this real gift of like, I'm going to pick my responsibilities and I'm going to act accordingly. And I can trust. And one of the biggest things is that not just having other people trust you, but another gift of sobriety is trusting yourself. There's so much. I mean, God, there's so many times I just didn't even trust myself. Like I didn't know like how I was going to be in a week from now, or I didn't know, especially if I was trying recovery. I didn't know if I was going to make it past week 2, or I didn't know if I could be counted upon, or especially if I was in the active addiction. I would make plans because I just want to, but I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. And now I don't want to tell them and cancel it, which is stupid because I ended up doing it anyways. But if I was given responsibilities at work, I would have this huge, immense feeling of insecurity because of just I didn't trust myself. God, I think that's Russian. Good to see you, Dave. Good to see you too. I'm sorry I have not been able to say like half these names. How dare me? My fault. I'll need to, I don't know. Also, if you witness two drunk persons talking to each other, it is zero communication. Each one is telling its own story for an external viewer. Shit, I said that wrong. If you witness two drunk persons talking to each other, it is zero communication. Each one is telling its own story for an external viewer. It's so confusing. I was confusing and also hilarious. Yeah, it really is. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been to the bar. I've been at house parties and people drinking and stuff like this. Yes, it is Russian. Hold up real quick. I want to get this pronounced like Andre. Well, thank you, Andre. It's good to see you as well too. I was right. It was Russian. Sweet. I got that part. But yes, there it is. It is so funny to see the drunk people talking. And it is just, the funny thing is there's a lot of people that you can tell when they're quote unquote listening that they're just waiting for their turn to talk. You can tell it's just going one ear and out the other. Like there's nothing it's just a blank. It's like a video camera that's pointed at you, but there's no film in it. They're not processing nothing. They don't want to hear it. And so they're just waiting for their turn to talk. When it's two really drunk people, it is that, except they don't wait for their turn to talk. They just talk over each other in just this insane sort of really at times like this narcissistic, just like, yeah, dude, that reminds me of when I was just, and the other person, and they're like doing this, like, yeah, dude, like they're almost physically trying to like knock the other person's words out of the air down. And and again, like what I was talking about before is that because they're under the influence, they don't have this awareness. Like they don't even have this awareness that one, they're being rude, or two, that the other person's being rude to them, and how pointless the conversation is. They don't have that because they got to say their stuff, and they're usually repeating each other, and it's usually this insane, like, I know I feel bad for making light of this, but sometimes it is funny and it is true. In the same way, it's kind of like when you see like two like sort of mentally unwell homeless guys talking to each other, and they're both telling each other their stuff, and you just tell they're not listening to each other either. Whether one of them is probably like, that guy's crazy, and the other one's probably like, that guy's crazy, and they're just one guy's like, well, clearly the birds are drones. I don't know what you're talking about, chemtrails, but anyways, go on. And the drunk people, man, it's this emotional, like, it's so funny. You'll see people talking, and if you could not look at their expressions, if you just heard, you would, and you couldn't really hear the words, you just assume it's two people fighting because of the way that they're talking to each other. But then you look at it and you hear what they're saying, and they like they just, you're like, are you guys fighting or talking, or you're not listening? But like, what the, I was gonna say it's like something children do. I don't even think children do that. Like they'll at least pick up on, children can be rude and interrupt each other, but just, yeah. Oh my God, the drunk people just, I always say this too. And again, I was this person, so I'm going to make fun of it because it's always stuff I did where they want everything super serious. Either it's too much of a joke or it's super serious. And they just like, it's the person I always joke where they want to tell you this super important. Are you listening to me, man? Are you listening to me, man? Because what I'm telling you is super important. And I mean this. And as they're doing that, they're lighting their cigarette backwards. Like they're just lighting it. Or like, I'm being serious, dude. I'm not, this not even because I'm drunk. And they're like burning the cigarette butt because they still don't know it's backwards. And now they got tobacco in their teeth. And or dude's telling you this like huge philosophy about life as he like wipes like some of the puke off his shirt. And it's just this complete lack of self-awareness. Like, I mean, that was I'm a person where I can be vain at times too, which is something I've always needed to work on, addiction or not. And so the being drunk was this perfect gut punch to that, because I know how fucking foolish I'd look. It would be so stupid because I would just, there would almost be times where these little, like a little squirt of clarity would come into my alcohol-soaked brain, and I'd be like, David, I think you're embarrassing yourself. I think you're going to wake up tomorrow and you're going to be embarrassed of all of the shit you're doing right now. And I'd be like, anyways, and just go on with it. And then wake up in the morning embarrassed. Andre, your recent Patreon episode was the perfect length. I started it as I rode my bike home from a haircut appointment and ended when I got off my bike at the door. That is because, Andre, I was recording it as you were doing it. I was actually watching you the whole time talking. I was watching you get you'd ride your bike. Good haircut, by the way. I was watching it all, and I was just right when you went through the door. I was like, all right, click episode over. I do like that. I like it. I've been trying to do episodes where I don't talk as long as I'm talking, as long as I plan usually for these live streams to go about 2 hours. It just depends on sort of questions I get, and I try to open an expanse of time to where I know people. I mean, people are talking about international and stuff. People that like pop in and to see what's up, or maybe they pop in and then they're like, okay, and then they pop in again. So anybody to get any sort of questions, and again, not questions, but topics, because I get emails on the No Chaser thing and the Shoeless in South Dakota, which, by the way, listen to the podcast, Shoeless in South Dakota. I co-host with my good friend Brent. We talk about mental health and recovery stuff, also a lot of stuff, even more recently, philosophy, a lot of space talk, sociology, all that good stuff. Anyways, but I get a lot of emails where there are questions that, I feel like I can't answer because it doesn't take like, a master sobriety wizard to answer it. Like the funny thing is, I think, if you combine both the emails that are addiction recovery related, almost half of them are actually from people that aren't addicted themselves, that it is people that have someone in their life, because we all have one, to be honest. It depends on how close they are or not, but somebody in their life and something they're going through. And it's usually very nice. Like, I appreciate them because they're very compassionate, and they're truly, they don't have to, but they are working to understand. And I always think, going back to the thing about in rehab where they have like the family sessions, I always think it is a good sign if there's people participating in that, because it's someone willing to. I remember being in rehab. I had this feeling where I did not want to have a family session, but not because I was scared of it or anything like that. Sometimes I was. I was like, don't yell at me. But no, also because I didn't want to ask them to do anything. I already felt like bad enough because I was like, man, I put them through a lot of shit, or they're mad at me, or they've already done so much for me. And now I'm asking them, as I'm sitting in here, not working, not helping them out with anything, and now I'm asking them to go out of their lives and come and sit with me and do this therapy stuff that I'm sure they're not super pumped to do. But again, a lot of times that was me making an assumption. There was, whether it was my mom or my girlfriend at the time, they're like, when are we going to do it? I want to do it. I was like, oh no, do they want to do it because now they're going to yell at me? But no, a lot of people just didn't want to understand because, and it's so easy to forget this sometimes, is that people love you and care about you. They love you and care about you, and it's so hard to believe that. And this is actually just perfect timing for this because Jasminski, maybe. Fuck, really not doing well with why did the light dim? I don't know. I don't think this light's going to last. Yeah. Let's see here. This will be pointless because I think it will go out here pretty soon. Where is is this better? I don't know. Jesus, that's bright. Okay. But yes, shame is such a difficult state. It is. And almost rats. Okay. But shame is such a difficult state. And going back to this thing about like why I wouldn't. Come on. Get it together, man. Perfect right there. I misstepped the light for the camera. Shame is it is the fuel of addiction. Going back to that idea, I didn't want to bug anyone, and I didn't want to ask them to help me with anything because I didn't feel that like they'd done enough. And a lot of times it's like, this is like my life we're talking about here. I'm like, I don't want to bug them. And again, shame does not end when you stop drinking and using. And it does not end when you've had a couple of weeks, a couple of months, sometimes even a couple of years of sobriety. It just doesn't end because you stop doing the thing. And in fact, sometimes, for me, I go through this a lot where the shame is almost more palpable because it's more, you can feel it more. It stings because you have, for better or worse, more clarity, and your reflection is in much clearer, higher definition. And you understand, you become more aware. When you're talking about a lack of self-awareness, you become more aware of the of what was really going on and the things you were doing and how were affecting people. Like I talked about that personal anecdote about me not being present. You start realizing that stuff, and you're like, man, dude, I suck, you know, and it is, but it's it is a perfect fuel for addiction for like many reasons, because one, it makes you think you don't deserve things. Yeah, the shame aspect is one hell of a bitch for me too. Makes not reaching for the bottle all the more difficult. Perfect. Yeah, we can jump on this one here. Yes, because shame is, like I said, it's addiction fuel, and it will do a couple things. So like the first thing I was talking about was that it makes you think lowly of yourself. It makes you, because one of the things, truthfully, is what is crazy. And this, I did a recent episode about this, about the one of the biggest lies in addiction is just like, well, I'm only hurting myself, right? Which, at least for me, and I know for a lot of other people, it's totally a lie. You don't live in a vacuum. You're not only hurting yourself, right? But the 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 thing is too is that if you just even investigate that statement, like I'm only hurting myself, it's like, okay, so you admit you're hurting yourself. Don't you not want to do that? And I think about the way that I treated my body, my mental health, the torment I was putting myself through. And it was just like, fuck, like I treated myself like that. And it's like, of course I did, because I felt lower than dirt. I felt like an absolute piece of crap. And that's perfect, because shame, another thing it does, it can also trigger that sort of useful self pity. Because self pity is not just wallowing and going, poor me. It can take other forms. And it's just this idea. It can even be sort of like this cold apathy of just like, I don't deserve any better. I suck and I'm not gonna be able to stop this. I don't have the power to. That shame can make you think so low of yourself and your abilities. So I'm not gonna be able to do this thing. It sucks away all confidence and belief you have in yourself. And you need some of that to get better. And so it sucks all that away. And again, this perfect sort of psychological torture rack that is addiction, it will cause you to do more shameful things. It will cause you to act, even if you're not doing something, like you're not getting DUIs, you're not hurting people's feelings, you're not whatever. It's just the shame of always hiding, the shame of living a lie, the shame, and just truly living a lie, just walking around and always under the influence, sneaking your drugs, your alcohol, sneak drinking. If you're like me, pouring vodka into water bottles, and I'd always be like, I literally so many times, if I had a water bottle, because I still drink water and got to keep hydrated so I can keep drinking. But I would always have to sniff the water bottle because sorry, there's some things popping up. I would always like have to sniff the water bottle because there could be vodka in it. But there's all these quiet moments to yourself. Like if you're preparing your drugs to shoot up or to smoke in the bathroom, locked in by yourself, hoping that someone outside, maybe your family, maybe your loved one, whoever, doesn't knock on the door, and just all the hiding and sneaking, hiding the bottles, like from, if you're living with someone that is super not cool with your alcoholism or drug use, hiding, especially with drinking, you hide the bottle so well, even you can't find it. Even hours later, you're like, fuck, man, I'm so good at this, dude. I don't even know where it's at. And it's all these little moments. I'll read a couple of things. I am confronting a lot of my own shame at this moment. I feel AA really exacerbates and amplifies shame. It's a great program, but it often makes me want to drink more. Yeah, I think that can certainly happen because, like what I'll always say is that AA meetings really vary. A lot of them work. A lot of them work in sort of in different ways. And I remember that I would feel a lot of shame just for the fact that I would be around a people that seem to get it and I seem to not get it. Some people, like, if I don't know if this is the case, but makes people want to drink more because people they'll spend a lot of time talking about drinking. Those aren't always useful meetings. Some people say they talk about it because they need to remind themselves. Well, the problem is if you're just coming out of it, like you're like, I don't want to be reminded. I don't need to. I'm living it right now. And the thing is that there is a catharsis in being able to talk about how you feel and some of the things you did and stuff like that, and people to relate to it. However, if you just unload it and you're not really processing it and no one's helping you do that, then you're just like, oh God, I can't believe I just said all that out loud. And it's all true. Ugh. That is one thing. 12-step programs are incredibly helpful and useful to a lot of people. And a lot of people do sponsorship and are sponsors and stuff like that. But there is sometimes this like issue that I've seen before where sponsors need to realize that what their program is, what their expertise is the 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is not therapy. It is not psychology. They're not trauma informed. Like I've seen a lot of sponsors where, the people that they talk about what their sponsor tells them. I was like, I don't think that's in their purview. Like, I don't think they need to be telling you what to do with this traumatic thing that they have not themselves been through. And so there's a lot of like lost in translation. And most of it, here's the other thing though, most of it comes from people that mean well. They really mean well. They may not understand that, hey, what your suggestion is, like a good thing is combining AA with other stuff. But AA, if you're talking about like real sort of psychological issues, if you're talking about navigating through areas of your life that aren't drug and alcohol related, I don't know, the sponsor is just a person too. Like you don't in AA, there's not a graduated or accelerated program of teaching and learning. And I know a lot of people are like, I don't need that fucking book learning. I learned the streets. I'm street smart. I'm wise from living, which is very true in a lot of respects. But it's not, you can't just be street smart for everything. If somebody is trying to deal with their conflicting feelings about their sexuality and having trauma that was related to that in their past, you're not just going to give them the big book and tell them to read page 86. You shouldn't, at least. That requires somebody who's trained to do stuff like that. All right, so that was a big sort of tangent, but yeah, back to the confronting the shame. And people will tell you that you need to forgive yourself. And this is like one of the big things that is very difficult for people is the forgiveness of self. And it's hard because, like I said, it's this sort of thing that comes into tandem where you get more clarity and you feel more emotions. You're not numbed by the substances or the chemicals anymore. So you get this more clarity. And so you are, like I said, you're seeing everything with no filters in full high definition. And it's jarring and it's hurtful and it's painful. And now you can't make it go away. You can't glug, glug, glug. And there goes those feelings. I don't want to think about it anymore. That's why a lot of people I know that are veterans, they struggle with drinking and drugs a lot, and in relapse, it's triggered by their PTSD. Once again, people in 12-step programs, I mean, it'd be nice if they're well-versed in it. It'd be nice if they're also a veteran that deals with PTSD. But if they're not, and they're trying to be like, well, you just work 12 steps, and it's just like, hey, hold on a second there. It's dealing with PTSD and dealing with the shame for maybe things that they did or things that happened to them. It does not just go away just because you stop drinking. In fact, it feels more amplified because you can't block it out anymore, which is, sounds weird, but it's good because that's how you process with it. Like a lot of things that I think alcoholics and addicts forget, or at least that I certainly forgot, is that pain is a signal. You're supposed to feel pain. In fact, like I've heard these weird stories about these people that had these nerve like conditions where they didn't feel pain and in certain places and how much they fucked themselves up because they didn't realize that, like, they would have a tear in their ligament or they burn themselves, just the idea that you don't feel it. So you don't do anything about it. And when you should, it's pain can be, it's a signal to move. It's a message to do something. And the same thing is with, like, I believe with mental and emotional pain is that it's a signal that something is not right. Something needs to be addressed or it's something that needs to be processed. And process doesn't always have to be, whip out the DSM and whatever number it's at now. It does not always have to be, but it has to be acknowledged. It can't, for most people, you can't just like push it away and hope it gets better. A lot of people, the idea that time heals everything. And it's just like, yes and no. Like if it's just been blocked and stuffed during that whole time, the time hasn't been able to really to work its magic or do anything with it. You see, I don't want some of these cons. I don't want to get lost yet. We'll definitely get back on that. I am not an addict, but when I go out to go clubbing with my friends, I would feel deep shame for being loud and annoying for multiple days. And then I eventually told them, and they thought I was ridiculous, feeling embarrassed or anything about it. I definitely understand that. I think actually this does relate back to shame. You mentioned shame in it. I think it does, because that would actually happen to me a lot too. I was talking about just not too long ago about the idea of like, oh God, I'd have no awareness and I'd just be a big goofball and maybe annoying and stuff. And I feel like such a fucking piece of shit and such just an idiot and stuff like that. And again, sometimes there is the sort of narcissism or self-centeredness when you're in the cycle addiction. Not saying this is your case, but at least saying for mine, that you're thinking about yourself so much. So you think you impacted these people or you ruined their whole night. And they're like, you're just being a dummy for a little bit. It's no big deal, dude. Like, don't care that much. But in your brain, you do, because if you have any predilection to shame already, that is another thing, is that it will amplify things that aren't even that bad. Like things that you aren't really bad. You feel so crummy and you feel so bad about yourself that if you even it's like a lot of people that are very insecure and they take things the wrong way, or they internalize something like falsely, where they think that this person hates me, or this person doesn't want me to be around, or I'm annoying this person or something like that. And it's not about what the other person's doing. It's about how they feel. So when you have that shame, it, like I said, it contorts things too. And it really, it's a sort of a blocking agent for seeing things clearly, and especially seeing yourself clearly, because it's all through this lens of cynicism and negativity towards yourself. Patricia, get used to the dark. That sounds very ominous. I think that was maybe when before I turned my light on. Did you get used to the dark, or are you warning me to get used to the dark? I don't like that. It almost sounds threatening. Let's see here. This was, I think, probably from one before. Definitely not. The program is limited, and many sponsors take advantage of the power dynamic. Yes. I'm sober for a year. I assume there's a V there. I don't want to call you out, but I assume that's sober for a year, which is amazing, truly great. But yes, because like any program, like anything in life, it's made up of people. And, there's this sense too, because especially with a lot of recovery programs or just recovery communities where, people will say that time doesn't matter. And it's like, okay, time shouldn't matter that much, but time does matter. Like it matters if you have a couple of weeks or a couple of years, right? Like it does matter in that sense. But here's the one thing though, so much of it is also about time. It's what you're doing with it. Like, there's a concept in AA and stuff, and this is where like you see the power dynamic and people being basically shitty, like, or egomaniacal, go out of whack a lot, is that with the concept of the dry drunk, or the clean addict, whatever the version of the drug part is. But essentially it describes a person who is not actually changing. A lot of times it's sobriety without recovery. They haven't actually made any of the fundamental changes that they have needed to. And it's just a subtraction of something from their life. It is just not drinking, not doing drugs, but nothing else has changed. They still have maladaptive coping behaviors. There's other more accepted ones, less destructive ones, or they're incredibly like irritable, or they're cranky, or they're very pessimistic and moody still. And they a lot of the same problems. They have a lot of the same relationship problems, and maybe tempered a little bit, or not as bad as they were when they were full down drunk, but a lot of the same issues are there because they're acting a lot in the same way there. I mentioned before, like big addictive behavior is lying. They're still doing a lot of that, or they're still very self-centered, or they're still, And it's because they really haven't changed anything about themselves. They've just changed the intake of their chemicals. And you'll see that a lot where that's where a lot of people throw down the gauntlet of like, I've been sober this long, so you need to listen to me. And I just, in my esteemed opinion, I don't know. I just think from a more psychological point of view is that usually people that like really press on that, it is because they're trying to have time basically take place of what a lot of people think is, a lot of people in recovery, especially in 12-step programs, it's just like you you see people that have what you have, sorry, you see people have something that you want. And so you'll be willing to listen to them and take their suggestions and follow them in whatever way they're being because you want what they have. And hopefully it's not money or the house or the car or the girl or the guy or the popularity or whatever, but just the way that they are. Like you appreciate someone that is very kind and compassionate or very wise or very mentally and emotionally strong and very friendly and gets along with a lot of people, but are still very genuine. Like those things that you emulate towards. So like at a certain point, you don't even ask them how long they've been sober. You just like, you're doing the deal, or at least you're doing something, and I want that, so I'm going to follow you. But if you don't see that in someone, and they need to remind you that I have not used heroin for this long, and they have to constantly remind you of that, it's maybe because what they're trying to attract you with is not the way that they actually are. And as far as like, the power dynamic too, again, people are going to be people. People be peopling. And so there is, in these weird ways, people can have this sense of power. I mean, and it can be very intoxicating. Stupid. But it can be intoxicating in the sense that you have people, like I said, like at the very top of this, when I was talking about rehabs, like you have people from all sort of backgrounds, all sort of areas of life. And you could have somebody in some scenarios that is like normally is of a higher socioeconomic, unfortunately, those ways that we rank people in our brain sometimes in society, but have someone of a higher socioeconomic status than you, but they're newer in recovery and sobriety, or they're just, they're trying to stop. So now they're listening to you and they see you as the arbiter of knowledge, or they see you as a person that is sort of this authority. You can see a lot of times, again, it doesn't matter if it's recovery or what it is, people that get a little bit of authority or imagined authority can get a little nutty with it, but they see, it was a burp, that was gross. Why did I say it out loud? I didn't need to say it. Okay. But they see that and they get a taste of this thing where the people are looking up to them in some sense, or at least they are in whatever way that it's measured, which is a lot of times with time, to where they are at this higher stage. And because it's just a matter of fact that most people that struggle with drugs and alcohol are not sober. That's the truth. Most people that are, is not to say that they'll never be sober, but at any given moment of all the alcoholics and addicts out there, less are sober in recovery than the ones that aren't. So there is this sort of pedestal they are put on because like, I'm one of the ones who are doing the thing. I'm one of the ones who are making it. And, it just that sort of, it can add to some grandiosity. And again, you just take people that are human. So when they get this sense of authority, and a very important type of authority too, not just authority at a job, not just authority as a parent, but as authority of in this group, this social group of a person who knows more or is doing whatever the group mission is better. Again, it should not think that way, but people will, or they'll intuit that, and then they think that they are, they'll go to their head sometimes because you'll especially have the sense that there's people, like if you sponsor a lot of people, there's people that are calling you and asking you, what do I do? Or you're letting people just even know about the information that they're just not aware of because they've never been in the program. So you're teaching people things, and you are this teacher now. And people, when they are desperate, especially a lot of times with men, where you have other men, which is very rare, asking you for help, you're like, yeah, I'm fucking killing it over here, right? And I mean, of course, that can absolutely, just in any other facet of life, that can go to someone's head. Shame is mostly a feeling inside of us. If we try to be honest with people around us, most time we're worrying for nothing. It's mostly inside our minds. Yes, Yes. I mean, in this sense, shame is, I mean, people can absolutely, okay, so people can absolutely, shame can be put on you. Shame can, you can be shamed for sure, right? But how it, so maybe that's how it initially manifests, how it becomes a part of your psyche, but it's a lot like anger in that sense. Like there was one, I was reading something somewhere, something about a person who was talking about anger, and he said the interesting thing is that you realize that anger is something you regenerate, and something you through rumination and through just energy to like keep going. You realize it's something you have to do because he's just like, imagine even if you're having a terrible day and you feel awful and you have lack of sleep and you're hungry and you're cranky and all this stuff, just imagine to be angry for an entire day. And I mean an entire, not for like I was angry in the morning, angry in the afternoon, angry, no, but angry for the entire day, regardless of what's going on. Even if you're driving, you hate driving, you're around a bunch of people that are driving poorly, through every second, every minute of the day, that would be really hard. That would require some effort and some work to keep up the, let's say if you measured it with some sort of like, heart monitor thingy or pulse or whatever, to keep being angry, to make sure you have it going for an entire day would take a lot. It would take a lot. Stuff can certainly spike it, but something can jostle you into being angry. But to truly like be angry for an entire day, it would take a lot. And I think a lot of it is also with shame, where you can feel guilt, you can feel embarrassment. And something I learned a long time ago from people smarter than me is that to remember the big difference between shame and guilt is that guilt is you feel bad for something you have done. Shame is you feel bad for who you are. And that shame part is, and again, that who you are thing is way up to interpretation in a lot of sense. Like guilt for something you've done, you can mix stuff up. You can think something that you've done is really bad, maybe not as bad, but just for who you are can be from a lot of things that you just tell yourself. Or that you agree to, that if you take a step back, like one of the things I did like is that what you said here is that most of the time we worry for nothing. If we be honest with ourselves. Yeah. So if you tell people what you feel bad about, or like especially you are, and you do express it, people kind of, hopefully in a kinder way, be like, what are you talking about? Like, no, that's not the way it is. People don't think that way about you. And hopefully they'll make you realize how foolish, because shame is also very foolish at times. It's you just think like, man, why I made all that into this, or I just thought all of that from this little mustard seed of a gesture or something that someone made, or I brought out all this childhood shit from this one weird interaction I had at work, and then I completely clouded up my mind through all of it. And people, it's like a lot of times where it's so important to express things because a lot of stupidity goes on in here, and most of my stupidity thrives in silence. It's like when I keep it to myself, the real dumb shit starts to like build momentum. And sometimes when I just express something that I'm thinking as I'm saying it, I'm like, oh, this is very stupid. And I realize I'm just like, oh man, just expressing it, just saying it out loud. And especially a lot of people, for the negative self-talk you have, a lot of people suggest to write it down, because when you write it down, you'll realize like, Jesus Christ, this is how I talk to myself constantly. There's all this shit I've just, in this past hour, all this stuff I've said to myself, I wouldn't say to a person I hate the most. I'll go to jail for this or something. Like, this is insane. And here's more important, not just to see how vicious it is, but also see how silly it is. Like, you mess something about work, something inconsequential, and you're like, dude, I fucking suck, dude. I'm so stupid. And you read that and you're like, okay, chill the fuck out. Like, really? Like, you sent the email to the wrong person and you're just like, you should like fire yourself. Like, so silly. But when it's in your mind, in that kind of ethereal, like sort of vagueness of your mind, where it's not, you don't look at it, you don't really like transcribe it into anything that you can, like, it just stays in that weird place. It gains a lot of power because it's in this darkness where it's like what I always say is like with I love horror, and I've actually been writing a lot lately. No one cares about that. One of the most effective ways, one thing you realize a lot is that the scary monster, at least for me, in most movies and stuff is always even in books when they fully describe it, like when you see the monster, it's usually disappointing to me. Sometimes you'd be like, oh, that's a cool effect, or that's is that CGI or is that practical? That's neat. It's not as scary anymore because nothing is going to be as scary as what your mind can make up. When it's in the darkness of your mind, like that's why the monster is usually scariest when it's the shape of the shadows, or it's just like there's a glimpse of something and then your mind runs with it. That's why I feel like some things are so much scarier in books because it does require your mind to imagine what it is. So if it's not described not accurately, not described that in detail, as long as it's not too vague, it could be scarier because your mind is going to create. The people always talk about how they're afraid of the unknown. And what I think is that it's not so much being afraid of the unknown. What is really being afraid of is your mind. Your mind is filling in what that unknownness is. And it is coming up with all these horrible, everything is worst case scenario. Everything is the most horrible thing in the world. And that same thing, I believe, applies to the way that you feel about yourself, that in this shame, it's kept in this dark place. So all these crazy thoughts can bounce around. All these, again, not just crazy or mean, but silly thoughts that just bounce around like, uh, and going back to the idea of self-forgiveness, like one thing I think is that a lot of times I specialize the things I've done. My sins have been specialized because there's so much stuff that I forgive others for. I become understanding that other people do. People in recovery, totally understanding, and you empathize with them, and you're compassionate towards them, and you realize the stuff they didn't mean to do, or stuff they were lost, or they were a sick person, whatever you want to call it. But when you've done those same things, you're like, no, but mine are unforgivable. Mine are the worst. My form of DUI was worse than yours, even though I didn't kill anybody or anything like that. It was still more evil than yours, more unforgivable than yours. My way of being shitty to people was worse than yours, way worse than yours. And my sins are worse, even if they are equivalent to other people that I would totally give compassion to. If mine are just worse because they're in your mind and they're in this way where your motives were worse or your intentions were worse or your version of selfish was more selfish or anything like this. Sometimes I say too, there is in a weird way almost this like sort of like narcissism to it where you're just like, mine are the unique special sins. Unlike all you people, mine are worse, even though they're the same acts on paper, worse. And that's something we build up to. Now, this is not to like negate the things you've done, but a lot of times too, if you talk about like in the 12-step program where people make amends, I always think that there is two fears that people have. All right. When they go to make amends and they've had this big, horrible thing that they've done in their mind to this other person, this awful thing. They don't even want to look at the person. They don't even want to think about it. Right. Big, super bad, big thing. And there's two fears. There's one is that they will go to the person and they will say, I feel I'm a different person now, but I'm truly sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry for how I affected you. Is there any way I can make it up? I am sorry. And the first fear is that the person will be like, hey, how about you? Fuck you. No. Unforgiven. Just like the Western with Clint Eastwood. Unforgiven. You are no. Get out of here. Fuck you. Right? Fear number one. Fear number two, which I argue is, and sometimes the bigger fear, the big horrible transgression you've caused upon this person. Their life is probably ruined in shambles. Every day they see a picture of you in their mirror and they shake their fist at it. How dare you? You tell them the big bad, super bad thing you did and you ask for forgiveness and they go, what are you talking about? They have not thought about it since. Again, going back to the one person, not the one, going back, I believe it was Andre who was talking about like the friends are just like, don't worry about it. You feel so embarrassed about this stupid thing. They're like, no big deal. Same thing you do. You've created this big, scary monster in the shadows of what you've done, or back to the point of shame, who you are. And it is always worse than what the reality really, really is. Maybe this was probably something responding to something I said a long time ago. Exactly. I have PTSD and it's a nervous system issue. Oh, yes. Yeah. I assume that was like people in programs kind of getting, needing to stay in their lane, giving, at the place I spoke to tonight, is other alumni, it's people that go there and speak just from the little community within, and they have rules for, you take this like little 30-minute like training thing where it's just like, basically the training thing is not how to speak, but just like, please, please, please do not say this shit. Please don't do this. One of it is like, don't talk shit about the treatment center. Like, clearly, why don't you go and speak there if you're like, this place, 0 out of 5 stars, would not recommend. You guys should get the fuck out of here. Don't do that. Don't break confidentiality. Don't be like, dude, this fucking turkey I know named Phil Kressermeyer, whatever. Why did I use a real sounding name? That totally made up name. But don't break confidentiality. Don't talk shit on any program. Don't talk shit on AA. Don't talk shit on Smart Recovery. Don't say whatever you want. Obviously not whatever you want, but sing your praises to whatever has helped you. Also, to avoid being super religious or godly, or just even godly, saying basically a lot of it is saying absolutes, like as far as like you need God, or even because that one is not a 12-step program, you need a higher power, or you're Fucksville, population U if you don't have that, or you have to work the 12 steps, or once again back to Fucksville, population U. Don't. And when one of the biggest ones, which I knew someone who had personally broke this rule, I knew they were going to break this rule. I was like, oh no, because I this is a community where we've kept in touch with each other and see each other at certain meetings and stuff like that. And I was like, no, where it was, and this is, I think, one of the subjects I want to dive into here is do not give advice about psychoactive medication. You are not a psychiatrist. You are not a doctor. And guess what? Even if you are a doctor, you're not a doctor here in this capacity. You're just a person in recovery that has been to this, you do not tell people that now that you're sober, just later skater with all the meds you're taking. Meds are bullshit. The pharmaceutical companies are the biggest drug dealers ever, which this is not pro pharmaceutical company, but it is that idea that it's all bullshit just because of the Sackler brothers. Everything's bullshit now. So you don't need antidepressants. And, even some old school just dinosaurs in AA that are just like, you're not even sober if you're taking antidepressants. It's like, it's so stupid. It's not how it works. Antidepressants were mood altering, like addictive chemicals. I would fucking be hooked on antidepressants. Guess what? I take them, super not hooked on them. Believe me, I tried. I was like, I've been desperate for in research. What if I take a shitload of Zoloft? Will I get high from that? Oh God, the moments of desperation. But yeah, there's one of the biggest things, and yeah, this is one of the a pitfall that you will find in recovery programs, especially the 12-step one. This is not to talk. I am part of 12-step stuff, so this is not talking bad on it. This is just giving you, and more so, I'd say this stuff too is to say that this is stuff you can experience. But there are other meetings that are super not like this. Like I said, they vary so much. Like about, like I always say, they vary sometimes. It depends on like what type of city you live in. Live in Omaha, which is a moderately sized type of city. I know it's in Nebraska. It's in Cornville. You can see the town through all that corn. But it's got a decent population, more populated than Miami, mind you. That's because Miami is more of a transient city. And anyway, doesn't matter. But the meetings vary seriously by not even just location, but time, like what time the meeting's at. And a lot of what dictates how the meeting will be is the people that are there. Like there's certain vibes, especially if it's not even a bigger meeting, if it's a little bit of a smaller one and there's regulars that go to it. Like that's one that I go to every week, is because I know you'll have some floaters of some people newer and stuff, but it's a lot of it is the same people I see every week. And because of the way that they are and we are and the person that chairs the meeting, it goes a certain way that I like. It can vary. So like, for instance, if you're going to a Tuesday meeting at 11 a.m. at a church, there will be a certain type of crowd, because not just because it's at a church, but because it's at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, you will probably get more retired people. Not saying anything bad about them, but there is more of a chance that you'll have a certain type of mindset or certain type of views on things more than others. If you go to a 11 o'clock NA meeting in downtown in the city, you will also have a certain type of crowd and a certain type of people. And so it does vary, but yes, there are some views that you will find that, I don't really like. A lot of times people are like, this is AA, it's by the book. This was written in, it was written this way. And I was like, it's also written in fucking 1930, which is amazing that it's had the power that it's had, but it's also that. And no one is, if you believe in like God and stuff or prophets or whatever, then no one besides your main dude is, or woman is, it's always a dude, isn't it? Fuck. But no one is that. No one is that. So this is not infallible word or whatever. A lot of good stuff there. But yes, people will be of that ilk and they will think that, and not even that it's you're not sober if you're on psychoactive medication. But that it is not you need to be all natural, baby. And this is something that even goes beyond it's always a dude. It's right. Prophets, gods just be talking to his bros. No, not half the population, not the person that gives birth to all the children in the world, just the dudes. I was gonna make some stupid joke. But and so it's this idea of, and again, this is something that's pervasive outside of recovery as well too. It's just people are like, the medication is messing with your brain chemistry and stuff too. So you need to make sure you get off of it, and you need to like experience life for what it really is. It's just, and it's so easily to tell that some of these people have even been on. It's easy to tell that either these people have been on the wrong types of medications for them, or they've never been on them. Let me tell you something. If I go back to the original thing I said about antidepressants being mood altering or anything like that, if they changed me drastically, I would either not take them all or abuse them. Now, some people do have interactions with them. And this was actually the one, this all started with the person who had kind of went off slay queen about fucking pharmaceuticals and stuff like that, was that it was that because I heard about people talking, they're like, oh, dude, it was a nightmare. It was just like this. It wasn't even about recovery. It was just about, I don't know, she was whatever, this tirade. But is what a lot of people will say too, is that they will have one anecdotal story. My cousin took Paxil and he grew a tail, so you shouldn't take it. Or I took Lexapro and my dick fell off, so don't take it. Or in more serious cases, some people kind of laugh because it seems weird where they're just like, this is antidepressant. And when they whisper all the stuff at the end of the thing, that could be the side effects and everything like that. One of it's like, this is for antidepressant. Also, you might kill yourself. It does seem weird. They have to give the warning of it. But people have had very bad drug interactions with that. Right. But that's them. And again, I know this seems right now, it might be some cognitive dissonance that's happening. It's like, aren't you telling people about pharmaceutical shit when you're talking about people, how they shouldn't be doing that? No, I'm not telling you which ones to take, not telling you which ones not to take. I'm super not a doctor, not a played one on TV. No, it's that I'm saying you should only really listen to research and to professionals and people who are trained to study. And, doctors are also humans. Like I said, everything is made up of people, so they're not always right. I've met some pretty terrible ones for sure, which is always something I feel you're tricked by, because there's like the call to authority where you're like, well, this guy's very smart because he has that piece of paper on the wall, and I am very dumb because I drink a fifth of vodka every day. So even though he seems not great right now, probably should listen to him no matter what. That's not always the case either, but you can get a consensus. But a consensus of people that have experience in the field and truly know what they're talking about. And here's another thing that happens, especially within the recovery community. It's weird. It's okay to drink a liter of vodka, but a pill will destroy right. I ain't taking gulp. I ain't taking this fucking I'm not taking any of this stuff. These pills are gonna turn my brain into mush. Yeah, right. I know that's what's so funny. That was always a funny. The little concessions I would make where I would be like, "My chaser is diet soda. Thank you very much." Um, just anyway. But no, David, don't squirrel it. Go back to yes. Where oh no, I lied to myself. Don't lose it. No, this was something I wanted. It's about pharmaceuticals. In the no, I'm losing it. No, God, who knew that fucking doing shitloads of drug and alcohol for a lot of my life would do this? Fuck. Ah, there was a point I wanted to make. It was something that I remember. You run into a lot where, um, people would based on their anecdotal something like that, right? I'm sure this is very annoying to listen to. It was people would have a certain experience with it and they think that that's what happens to everybody. I'm just fucking fumbling in the wind, damn it. I don't know. I'm sober, my brain still sucks at times. It's hard to remember stuff, you guys. I don't know, sometimes my memory was always very bad, and I think that I remember I'd meet with counselors and I think they thought I had repressed memories because I'm telling you, even like before a lot of the drugs and alcohol, or even when I was sober in younger ages, like I don't remember a lot I remember so little about childhood and even like older, like into middle school and stuff that I would actually make me insecure. I would not believe other people that remembered so much. I was like, there's no way because I don't remember anything. They must be like me and they're just lying about it. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe the antidepressants causing me memory loss, dude. Should need to get off that. They were right, dude. She was right the whole time. It's just poison they're putting into their brains to control us. Um, you know, I noticed that, like, and it's important to just ask questions too, because so much discourse happens. Where I remember, that like they would have people on psychoactive medications, antidepressants when they get into treatment. It was people that never had a history of depression, except for being fucking super bummed out for being an alcoholic or an addict. Like I said, it's one of those things where, again, if you never tell your counselor what you're going on and you're just like, dude, I'm depressed all the time. It's just like, well, she doesn't know you're alcoholic. She'll think you have clinical depression. But do remember, living the life of a degenerate alcoholic is depressing. It would be super weird if it wasn't depressing. One of the things that about myself is that I had strong issues of depression before I ever even drank. I had it at a young age. And that was always kind of like my measuring stick of just like, I don't know, maybe, because for a lot of my life, I had not been sober. And in the times I was a little bit sober. So I still was going through post-acute withdrawal syndrome. So I was like, maybe I don't have depression. But then I'd be sober long enough and my depression feels a certain way when I have a wave of it. It's not so much emotional sadness or anything like that. It's really more of an emptiness, more of tiredness too. It's like almost takes on more physical qualities rather. But there would be people, I guess I remember I was just curious. And so I asked, I was like, why, if a lot of these people don't actually have depression, why are you giving them antidepressants? Please don't hurt me. I'm just seriously just asking. I'm just curious. And it was in the sense they were like, yeah, we don't expect them to be on a regimen of it. Like as long as a person that actually has clinical depression, it's just almost a sort of like brain chemistry nutrients because like dopamine and has been so depleted. Like you fucking messed up your brain so much. And the feel good chemicals and serotonin and like mood regulation and stuff like that we're just using this to hopefully balance some of the imbalance. And it's not expected for the person to be on it if they don't have those issues. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, just asking the questions of professionals, not a Phil that the 30 years sober at the AA meeting who's just like, big book should be the Bible, and just stuff like that. Personalities are involved with everything because I go to a it's called Dharma Recovery, and it's a recovery program based on Buddhist principles, which I do very much enjoy. But here's the thing: you get personalities out of that too. You get a lot of dudes with man buns who close their eyes when they talk and say, "Hey, dude," and they put their fingers like this, and a lot of dudes like that. Which actually, nothing is wrong with that. Except it can be annoying. It's called spiritual materialism. Look it up. By the way, yeah. Fuck, there's a couple others. I was like, hello, people. Hey, Min. I believe I know you beyond the YouTube. I think that's yes, Mindy, right? Don't want to say anything. That person that may have known me through my dog days of drinking when I drink at work. It was a complete. Yeah. Oh man, drinking at work was just fucking. Oh god. Especially not even just drugs. Like, I remember when I did opiate during the opiate days, I'd just be kind of like pilled out. My pupils would be kind of tiny, but for the most part, I wasn't nodding off at work. I just kind of, maybe smoke more cigarettes than I normally would or something like that. But man, drunkenness is always scary, even when I like had a lot of experience with it, because just that was one of those things too, where I could always tell. And I realized how obvious it was when people that I worked with drank or used drugs, because it's not even just about the smell or the way they look or anything like that. It is, you notice it because you have it yourself, is that like most average people, the typical person mood does not elevate out of nowhere. Like all of a sudden I'd go on lunch break and I'd glug, 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 liquid lunch, and then I'd be in a much better mood. Good lunch. Subway, eat fresh. That was great. I had some sushi or whatever. And it's just like, no. People may get less cranky after lunch, but no one just like shoots like it became so obvious because when I'd be around other people that were, drinking or using at work, I'd be like, someone would be like, Craig is kind of, I don't know, man. He goes with the wind, man. I think he's bipolar because he's just up and down all the time. Like he came into work all pissed off, but now he's doing a lot better, and now he's cranky again. It's just like, yeah, it's probably because he's drinking, and now he had a couple nips, and now he's going back to withdrawal, so he's cranky again. Especially, oh my God, going through withdrawals with customer service, yuck. Serotonin is my preferred drug. Man, I remember like some of the most depressing stuff. It's important to know, but God, you're like, sometimes I don't want to know. It's just what you do to your brain chemistry, which thank God the brain, I believe that your body heals if you show it love. And what can be very scary is like the dopamine depletion and the way you screw things up. I remember they talked about it. It was just like burnt wicks of like neurotransmitters, like all this awful, like horrible imagery of just like the depletion that happens in your brain. And then they show these brain scans of what it looks like, when you try to get pleasure, and it's just like, your brain basically is just like, whatever, who cares? Like, because it's just, you've set a new standard. Like you just, and again, this is not stuff that I know. This is what other smart people know that I'm repeating. But you set this, what was it called? Shit, memory. It's like this dopamine threshold where you're at like a normal amount just throughout your life. You're like, ooh, a sunset. Oh, boo, Monday. And it's just a sort of like this. And then you get these huge spikes when you drugs or alcohol too. It's a depressant. It's like, I don't know. It didn't make me feel depressed when I first started drinking, when I catch that buzz. But anyways, you have these spikes, and there's that little line. I'm trying to use the camera to do this. Very stupid. But that little line, if it was here, once it's been spiking up so much, it starts to rise. And the problem is that your baseline is always here. So then your baseline is under the dopamine like threshold line. So your baseline is now shitty. It's not as great. And that threshold line gets higher and higher and higher. So your normal now feels lower and lower and lower. And it needs to readjust. And the reason it can sound so depressing is that like, oh, I'm not going to get those spikes again. It's like, for the most part, no, you're not going to get those insane dopamine spikes that you had before. However, the two important things are to remember. One is that you're not going to have those dips either. It's not just like, nothing is ever just this back to baseline, this. It goes this and then down to where you can't see, right? And what happens to your mind too, and it's all about what it adjusts to and what it becomes its normal, is that those huge spikes don't feel like huge spikes anymore. Like that's the craziest thing, is that you're just like, you're screwing up so much stuff because that what has been like crazy good feeling is now just whatever. But the problem is that the crazy good feeling is whatever, but the lows are super not whatever. Like they feel awful. So in this horrible way, like I said, it's always like diminishing returns, where You get less of a return on your investment, aka, but the crappy feels just as. I mean, the real crappy feels real crappy. So the real good just feels like good, and the bad feels like bad, and the real bad feels like real fucking bad. And so when it regulates, and when it gets back to some sort of normalcy, that sort of baseline good feels a lot better. It's very weird to think about. It's because a lot of it, like a lot of things, is kind of just in your own perception, and this is almost like a physiological perception where it doesn't seem to make sense because it's just like the good feels gooder, using smart words now, and the bad doesn't feel better. Like it's very the way it works is it's weird. The neuroplasticity that happens, the way your brain just goes, all right, we're done. We kicked the drunk guy out of the captain's driver's seat, and now we're going to try to take this shit over again. It takes time. However, it is amazing. It doesn't take as much time as you'd think it would take. It takes time, but it doesn't take as much as I think I'd like. I mentioned earlier, and this is something I mentioned a lot because I think it's not talked about enough, is pause. It's a very pleasant name for a very bad thing. I say it's very depressing, but it is very important to recognize. Like the brain scan stuff, maybe especially if you're a meth user, maybe don't look at those. Those could super bum you out. And it might not be that important to know unless it's something that will get you to not go back to using meth. But pause it's post-acute withdrawal symptoms. It's called two things, weirdly enough. It's like bi-weekly. Is it post-acute withdrawal symptoms or post-acute withdrawal syndrome? But the point is, it is a large part of this brain healing process and kind of the bumps in the road thereof. Where it is most noticeable is a lot of times it is physical things that you felt during your acute withdrawals, like during your sort of detox and getting out of that first couple of week fog. So it can return to people, which has happened to me before, where sometimes you get the shakes again. And this is like 6 months down the road, and you'll start getting the shakes, and it's like, whoa, where's this coming from? I didn't drink. I don't remember I did. But then again, if I drank, I probably wouldn't remember, right? Memory too, by the way. And not just that, but also fogginess, like this sort of like your brain is just, it's not because you're tired, not because you're hungry. Your brain is just this, they literally call it like brain fog. And it's kind of like maybe what you felt in your first couple of weeks, but you feel it 4 months down the road or something like that. And sort of like pins and needles. Like, again, some of the physical effects are the ones that are noticeable because it's very weird to feel them after having not felt them for such a long time. But the big thing is, the thing I hone in on, is a very important thing, is the mental and emotional post-acute withdrawal symptoms, where that sort of spikes of anxiety, the sort of like waves of irritability, like irrational irritability, again, not from being hungry or tired or whatever, but cranky, but you have no idea why you're so cranky. In that sort of sadness, not even the normal depression, but just being like deflated, and all these things you would feel like during those hard couple of weeks as you came out of it, you feel later on, and you're like, what the fuck? I thought we were getting back to normal here. What's going on? Why do I feel like day 3 again or something like that? And that happens. And one of the depressing things is that it can last up to 2 years, which is like, ugh. But again, it is not 2 years of straight feeling this way. It's not a detox that happens for 2 years, but it can just occur, and it can flare up, and it can be very sort of like sadly disorienting or disappointing, where you're like, what is going on? I shouldn't be feeling this way. Why is this happening? Is my brain like regressing? But it just happens, and there's no timetable of when they go away. There's certain leftover computer. Awesome. Good seeing you here. Hello as well. I guess I never type into this thing, but I normally just bring it up in the chat. Anyways, but the thing is that it's also, like all very fucking annoying things, is that there's not regulatory sort of timetables of stuff. It's just like, yes, in 7 months and 46 days, which I think is 8 months and certain amount of days. But you don't know, this will happen at this time. In this time window, this will happen. And no, some people do have it in these sort of cycles where every 3 months they'll flare up, right? Some people have it where every 6 months they'll flare up. And they only have these sort of big flare-ups maybe 3 times. Sometimes it's just totally irregular. It just happens. I mean, what a lot of this is, where you can see it though, and what a lot of the research shows, is that you can see where certain people, there's these time periods where you see a lot of people relapse, and they relapse not related to anything going on in their life. It's just like, I've heard a lot of people, and I used to I was one of these people where it was just like, I don't know what it is, dude. Every 80 to 100 days, that's like, all right, time for the implosion, times for relapse city. Well, city, relapse shitty is and city, whatever. And, for some people, like I know someone, it's like 40 days. Whatever weird thing, it's always like 40 days. 40 days in the desert. That doesn't even make sense as a reference. But it's 40 days, and they never can quite make it past that. Some people it's a year. I know, which is very rare. A person I knew had hit a year like 4 times and never made it to a year and a half. Never even made it to a year and 3 months, like 4 times. And he wasn't even that much older. Like, it seemed like it just, stuff was going good. And then just in a year, and again, he used to think, oh, well, this thing happened on the year that time. And then he was like, okay, but nothing happened the second time it happened. Nothing happened the third time it happened. What the fuck is going on? And it's just, it could be these major, like a lot of things, either you get these, I don't know, these it's more regular but lesser doses with more frequency, or you have these huge like post-acute withdrawal symptoms that just hit, and they built up, and people they feel this regression, or they feel like, honestly, a word I just think about it that it sounds weird but is apropos is scared. You're like, no, what? Why do I feel this way? I thought we were getting. I knew it wasn't going to get easier, but it was supposed to get better. Now it's not getting better. Like, now this is like, am I going to revert back to the way I was? Is life actually going to be this? Because one thing I like try to tell a lot of people, mainly try to tell myself, is that like, I try to remind myself is that if I think, man, I can't do this shit, like, dude, I don't think I'm going to keep up with this. I'm going to be able to do this or something. And it's just like a lot of things in life, it's like, you're not going to have to do this forever. Like, a lot of people are like, there's no way I can stay sober. I can't do it for the rest of my life, because they're thinking that they have the same mind that they'll have forever as week 3, that very difficult, vulnerable week 3 mind. They try to imagine the rest of their life that way. And it's like, no. It changes. It gets better. You're not always going to be in that super vulnerable, brittle, uncomfortable state for the rest of your life. But it just feels that way. And so, I would sort of feel that sense of like, no, it's come back, like this sort of depression and this sort of like dissatisfaction with life that led me to do drugs and alcohol in the first place, or keep doing them, or choose them over living normally, is going to be here, and it's going to stay. It's like when a very hard craving comes out of nowhere, like farther down the road, and you're like, no, the cravings are coming back. And it's like, it's not that they're coming back. You're just having a flare up of one. Jasminsky. I still don't know if I'm saying that right. You said it was close. This is so helpful. Mine is every year and 3 months. Wait, every year and also 3 months, or every year and 3, as in like every 15 months? Either way, both of those are possible. As a general thing with the pause, it people just have these certain cycles, and that's the one thing, is that I think a lot of times too, we play this sort of game of like this retroactively trying to diagnose what happened every 15 months. Wow. But yes, that's very possible. Where I know a person that it was like, I guess it only happened twice, but they said it came out of nowhere, and it was not based on, again, some life event like getting fired or divorced or something like that, but just, it was like 2 years. Thanks for the profound insight that the mindset is temporary and it will get easier with time. I never actually thought about that. I didn't either. I didn't, I just that because I've heard a lot with a lot of people. We've heard a lot that everything is temporary. Everything's temporary, dude. Good things, bad things, all temporary. Like the guy I was talking about with the Dharma meetings, the man bun and the koi fish tattoo and the closed eyes when he talks. We shouldn't make fun of people like that. Someone could be watching this, and koi fish are fine. Need to stop being a dick. Sorry, it's paused. But yes, the idea, and that's why I always thought I was so hopeless to get sober for a large part of my life, which, by the way, and I said this actually today at the treatment during my little spiel, is that I totally understand it if you think there's no way I can get sober. There's no way. I don't care what this doofus up here is saying about like you can do it, dude, and all this type of stuff. Maybe he can, but I can't because my mind does not work that way. And especially if you've never gotten sober before, never sober for any considerable amount of time, then whenever you first started using or whenever you first got addicted, which was me, was 15. And I remember I told you I don't remember, I have a lot of memory before that. So that is mostly of what I known. It's so difficult to imagine a mindset that you've actually never had. Someone is up there telling you, you're going to be this way, dude. It's going to be all right. And you're like, how do I know? I've never thought that way. Literally, or if I have, I don't remember it. All I've ever known is my mind being this way. So how do you expect me to imagine my mind not being this way? Because you're telling me so? Well, sorry, Charlie. I don't believe that quite yet or at all because I just can't imagine it, which I say is understandable. Because how do you imagine your mind being a way that's never been before? You know, I try to, a comparison I try to use is that it's almost like if somebody, let's say you were like a steadfast, super, whether religiously devout or just spiritually robust person that always believed in God, no doubt in your mind. Maybe he's not even the white beard, because like as we said earlier, it's always a dude. Not white beard God, not Mother Earth, not whatever, just whatever your conception of God is. You've always had that. Why is my phone going off? Shut up. But you've always had this conception of God, and you've always believed it all your life, right? At least as far back as you can remember, as far as you can conceptualize God, always there, no matter what, good times and bad. And then it would be like some goofer like me up there being like, hey, listen, if you follow this program of people telling you this stuff, of regular people and all this whatever, believe me, and you will not believe in God. Believe me. There's not this special document of anything like this, 12 steps, but it's basic or whatever, or it's this other, research recovery programming thing, or it's just these habits and stuff like that you do, and you're not going to believe in God. I promise you, you would be like, fuck you, whatever. Or just flip it on the other side. Let's say you've never believed in God. You were never angry at God or anything. This is more of my mindset. Totally agnostic or totally atheist. As far back as you can remember. And people, it's the same thing, which sometimes people do. They say, if you follow this program, you will believe in God. And again, in your mind, you're like, fuck you, double fuck you. I don't know. This is the way it's always been in my mind. There's no way. Now, I'm using that as an example. This has nothing to do with God. But I'm saying that sort of ingrained mindset is so hard to shake because it's like I've never felt any differently. And just because you're up here, and just because even these other people in here are telling me I'm going to feel this way, how do I know? How do I know if I've never felt it? Which is the hardest part is you have to believe, or hopefully you can get pummeled in being desperate enough. You're like, I'll try. I guess. I'm so desperate. I need to believe. People call God that too, like the gift of desperation. We love our acronyms in recovery. Good God. But yeah, it's hard to believe. It's what I imagine sometimes. Like I feel bad for teenagers, those rapscallions. Sometimes when, there's always a case you'll see where there's a, young teen and their first love, their first super serious high school sweetheart love, first time they ever said, I love you. First time they're babing it around, babe, whatever people say, dead ass bae, whatever. No cap bae. But first time they're in love, and then they get broken up with. They get dumped, whatever. Probably rude to say it that way, which is negating the point I'm trying to make. But they get broken up with, and then they are just emotionally eviscerated. They're just laying in bed, and they're listening to The Cure. Probably they're young, so they're listening to, I don't know, Cardi B, but sad version. And then they're like, I'm never gonna love again, and everything sucks. And again, see, I'm still like kind of mocking it right now. It's been so ingrained to do that, but if people they'll roll their eyes and be like, oh boy, you're here, you'll understand eventually that you're gonna love again. You're super young. Relationships like this happen, dude. Like it's totally you'll be fine, dude or dudette, dude, lady, dude, whatever. And they don't believe you. They're like, fuck you, dad. Fuck you, stepdad, stepmom. Fuck grandpa or whoever I live with, the guy who take me to the chocolate factory, it was grandpa, right? I don't know. What the fuck am I? Okay, anyways, but you're like, no, I love this person and no. And then you roll your eyes more. You're like, oh, they just don't get it. But being empathetic, the idea is that, you know what? Can you blame them for feeling that way? Because so far, throughout their entire life, even though it hasn't been long, it has been their whole life. They can't imagine more life than they've already had, right? So this is their entire life. There has only been one person in their life that has ever made them feel this way, and they have lost that person. You expect them to just be like, well, that's the way it goes. I mean, I only learned that through time and experience I have not had, but that's just the way. I mean, my dad told me that. He threw me a beer and said, buck up. So, yep, never mind. No, it's all of you have known. This one person is the only person that made you feel a certain way, and they're gone. They are gone. And there is no guarantee, like true guarantee, that someone else will make you feel that way. It's just expected, but there's no guarantee of it. So, of course they are. Of course they're heartbroken. And another thing on top of all that is that is their world. You may just be like, it's just whatever. Sophomore girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. Some kid named Skylar, whatever. But they don't have a wife or a kids or a career or anything like that. This is their whole world. So like when a kid this is now getting way off in the direction of something else. But like if a kid's bullied at school, that's like if you go to work and everybody treats you like shit, except you can't even quit jobs. Like you have to go there. Or if you quit high school or you go to a different one, you've also lost all your friends and you have to start all over. Like I try to use this as an example of just trying to understand that with people, it is so hard to intuit and to grasp your mind the way it has not been before, and to have things you haven't experienced before. I truly believed at a point in my life, or no, not at a point, for a very long time in my life, I did not believe I could live without drugs and alcohol. I knew a part of me, and I'd come to learn more and more, I can't live with them. So I'd be like, fucked, because I can't live without them. Because my mind, ever since I was goddamn 15, I don't remember shit before that, my mind has never functioned that way. It has always been drugs and alcohol are the way, and we will abide by the way. And I just didn't know. I didn't know my mind could be any differently because it never felt any differently. And by the way, also, it felt that way so intensely. Like going back to the analogy of like the believing in God or something. It's not just like, dude, the Yankees will never win the World Series again or something. I don't know. Like it's not something that you're like whatever about. It's something you believe and is a part of you intensely. And so you're saying this intense thing I felt my entire life up to this point is not going to be that way. And by the way, it's not going to be that way, not after years, but maybe after even a couple of months, it will start to change. You're like, whatever, don't believe you. And everything going back to brain chemistry and all that type of stuff there, everything is telling you the other way too. Like, no, you need drugs. So they're a liar. Yeah, good. I already thought they were a liar. Good. Agree with you, addiction. Everything is earth shattering when you don't realize it's temporary. Of course it is. It is that because, there's something to be said for, it's like cravings, like honestly, in a sense where cravings are, when I get over a craving, I look back on it. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, that would have been so bad. I had not too long ago, I had a dream where I drank and I woke up and I was like, no. Truthfully, even when I was awake, and then it just took me a second. I was like, oh, okay, good. But I've done that and done it IRL. In real life, I've relapsed and I've just, been like, no. But I've gotten over cravings and I've been like, oh, whew. Dude, we were about to be so stupid. That would have been so awful, right? But then I will have maybe a craving a month down the road or something like, no, this is going to last forever. Even though I logically and consciously know it's not true, it just feels that way, especially going back to the idea of intensity, where it just, you can tell me all day that it's not going to last forever. I was like, it doesn't need to last forever. This is bad enough. And so usually the route I go is just need to distract. Been there, listen to all that. I think you posted that when I was talking about the relationship thing, where it's just like, you just get over it, dude. thoughts can be so intense. It really can. You'll be crazy once they're able to plug some USB thing into our brain and start manipulating our thoughts and whatever. Hopefully for a good way. We're not gonna need the VR or the 3D goggles or IMAX or whatever, dude. Just the thoughts enough. Man, I could control my own thoughts. That would probably be bad. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody that has been on here. I appreciate all the questions and topics and just like feedback and all that type of stuff. I do enjoy doing this. It is a lot of me rambling, so I hope you all like it. I imagine watching this whole thing fast forward, just insanity. But I really do appreciate everybody being here. I will try to do that. I don't know really what I'm doing quite yet, as far as like I'm doing some videos. I'm mixing up some shorts, and I'm trying to do more of these. What I almost kind of want to get to is doing these in the shorts, because I can do a lot of those more frequently. But I don't know. But yeah, thank you guys a lot too. And be well. Be well, and shit, I can't think of anything clever to end on. I can't even remember the thing I was trying to remember. Yeah, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good one.